inputs. And at the end of the day, it's his decision.
Would you just offer up what your opinion would be on firing Jay Powell if the president were to do that? Do you think that would be a good idea, or would you dissuade him from that?
Look, Joe, I think that what we need to do is examine the entire Federal Reserve institution and whether they have been successful.
He wanted no part of that direct question. That was Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent this morning on CNBC, responding to a story in the Wall Street Journal about his efforts to sway President Trump away from firing Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. Citing people familiar with the matter, the paper reports that the secretary privately explained his stance against removing Powell, including the possible effects on the economy and the markets. President Trump responded to the report yesterday on social media, writing in part, "I know better than anybody what's good for the market and what's good for the USA. So get your information correct. People don't explain to me, I explain to them." Joining us now, the man who always explains to us, co-anchor of CNBC's Squawk Box and a New York Times columnist, Andrew Ross Sorkin. And Andrew, it is a Trump truism that he does not like it when one of his aides gets too much attention, and he particularly doesn't like it when one of those aides is portrayed as being the real power behind the throne, the sort of having sway over the president himself. Trump erupted angrily this weekend to that Wall Street Journal report. Talk to us about what you're hearing about that dynamic, but at least so far, Bessent has succeeded, for the time being anyway, in preventing Trump from firing Powell.
Well, look, this all started, obviously, well, it started many, many months ago, but even just last week, there was the report that Trump had been holding a piece of paper, flailing it around, saying it was effectively a letter that would have forced him to resign. And he said that he was backing off of that. I think there's a practical issue here, which is to say that Jay Powell is going to be out of this role as the chair come May, no matter what. And so the question is, if you were to try to force him to resign or push him out or do something right now, what happens between now and then? Are you caught up in court? Anyway, I think the bigger possibility at this point is actually something that Scott Bessent had suggested prior to the election of President Trump, which is the idea of creating a shadow Fed chair, which is to say that could the president announce who he is nominating as the Fed chair sometime this fall? Does that person's, just the nomination, the announcement of that person, who would likely be somebody who would be cutting interest rates or has declared that they plan to cut interest rates, something that would then force the market to think, okay, well, come May, there's going to be somebody who's going to be cutting interest rates. By the way, that may have already happened to some degree, meaning we don't even know whether it's going to be a Kevin Warsh or a Kevin Hassett or some of these other names that have been floated. But irrespective of whoever it is, I think the expectation is that person is going to be cutting interest rates. And so you already have the market sort of sensing that and almost planning for it.
Yeah, Trump advisors floating that idea. We should note the latest scheme from some in Trump's orbit to oust Powell is to blame these expensive renovations on the Fed building on him. Turns out the renovations that are so expensive ordered up by Trump's team in his first term. Andrew, in the last minute before we have to go here, the president's angry at the Wall Street Journal for a lot of things right now, but would not be angry at a headline that suggests from that paper that the U.S.'s economy regaining its swagger. You're our swagger correspondent, so fill us in.
Well, here's the thing about the swagger, and this is what makes actually this whole debate over the Fed so uniquely interesting. If the U.S. economy is swaggering so much, you actually don't need to lower interest rates. You lower interest rates when things are not swaggering, right? When things are not working, you lower interest rates. When things are working or literally working a little too well, you raise interest rates because you don't want inflation to take place. So there's a very sort of strange irony taking place between these two sides in terms of how much this administration can say, hey, everything's going great, and yet we want those lower interest rates. But it is true, at least right now, that it appears that the economy has a little bit of swagger to it. I think we're going to still have to wait a couple more months to really know whether the swagger is there or not, in part because we haven't figured out the trade issue. We're going to get to the beginning of August, and I think we're going to see the rubber's going to meet the road about whether we have tariffs or not on so many different countries, and that may change the balance of things, too.
Yeah, we'll be watching for that. CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin, we're always grateful when you can explain things to us.